Hunt with passion. Never stop casting. Chase the dream. Welcome to Season 3 of Musky Mastery Outdoors, sponsored by Joe Bucher Outdoors, #1 in big game fish products.
Hey guys, welcome to our new on the water teaching series that I'm putting out this summer. Right now it's mid-June and the top rater bite is on fire. I mean, we're really catching muskies on top water. It's been phenomenal. And one of the things that I want to talk about, because so many of these top rater muskies we're catching are at boatside tonight, I want to talk about the figure-8. I'm going to tell you some of the most important things that I go over on the water when I'm guiding my clients every day. So first thing is this: how much line do you want to have out for the figure-8? You really want to have only a liter's worth of line out. So you can see here, that's a liter's worth of line. Even this much is too much, because when you've got too much line out, your lure lags behind in the turns. So you really want only a liter's worth of line out. I mean, ideally it'd be a 1/4 inch, above your ball bearing swivel or whatever kind of leader you're working with, or your snap or whatever, split ring. But you really want to be very close to the leader. I really like having a foot of line out. Now, let's go over some of the basics. You want to try to keep the speed of your lure in the figure-8, whatever it might be. It could be a JB Rattler, it could be a 700 or a 500 Booker tail, it really doesn't matter. But you want to try to keep that speed the same as you enter the figure-8. One of the things I see people mess up on all the time is that they slow down. For example, folks will have a muskie coming in like this. Okay, ooh, here she comes. Big fish, big fish, big fish. Okay, go into that figure-8. Rod tip goes in the water, and then they do one of these. Very slow. They're looking at the muskie. They're trying to coax it into biting. You have to remember, you're emulating here. I mean, in this case, this top rater baby loon here could be a muskrat. This could be a baby beaver. It's probably going to be a duckling. It could even be a baby loon. And when things are getting chased in nature, generally they don't slow down. And neither would you if you're getting chased by a bear or whatever. So when I'm entering this figure-8 with any of my lures, you want to, if anything, speed up a hair. When I come into that 8, I actually probably speed it up underwater quite a bit. And a lot of folks ask, do you go underwater with top raters? I do. I mean, think about everything out here that you're emulating. And again, I use that word emulate because we're trying to simulate the real world here. All of these critters that muskies eat, generally speaking, dive. Loons dive, ducks dive, muskrats dive. So to me, it's a very natural thing to be doing when you're figure-8ing, is to bring that lure underwater. If it's a top rater, obviously, if it's another lure, you're going to be going underwater. But here's another tip. So lure's coming in, rod tip goes in the water well before the lure gets to the boat. That's one of the most important things. Check this out again. Here's a common mistake. So right now, don't do this. See how choppy that is? Your transition into the 8 is just going to be, you're going to blow your cover on a nice muskie. So you have to make sure your rod tip goes into the water well before, with these top raters especially. I'm listening for that sound. Okay, big fish, here she comes. Rod tip goes into the water. I'm actually diving that lure into the water well before I get into that figure-8. So the whole key here is to make your transition as smooth as possible. So that's one of the most important things. Now, the figure-8 basics here, you want to go wide turns and vary your vertical. You're obviously varying the horizontal direction change because you're figure-8ing. You could even do a circle. Circles work fine on some monster fish if you need the space. But you also want to change your vertical depth. So let me show you what that means. So as I come in, again, we already went over this. Rod tip goes into the water now, well ahead of time. And now I'm going to dip down deep. Now I'm going to come up a little higher. We call that the spy. Now I'm going to dip down deep, and I'm going to come up high, and I'm going to dip down deep again, and I'm going to come up high. So you see how I'm not only changing my horizontal direction, but I'm changing my vertical, my up and down direction as well. That's a very important secret here on making a quality figure-8. Okay, next thing, how do you hold the rod when you're figure-8ing? That's a really important thing to go over, because if you look at this, a lot of us, and again, if you're left-handed, it doesn't really change much, but here I am, I'm right-handed, I palm the reel in my left hand. If you don't do this, I see this a lot. It's kind of like you're riding a horse here. You know, it's this, can you get away with this? Yeah, but I think this is really awkward. You know, essentially what the angler will be doing here is coming in and really holding the reel just like you were when you were retrieving. Don't do that. What I try to do is when I'm actually figure-8ing, I'm holding the rod like I am when I cast. So again, I'm casting like this, right hand on the spool, left hand on the butt of the rod. I'm retrieving like this. Okay, I'm retrieving like this, but I figure-8 like this, with the exception that my left hand is actually just reversed. And what I'm doing as I'm coming into the figure-8 is I'm going from this retrieve position, and I'm moving my body. I'm using my chest to push the lure. And as I push the lure, I'm actually going to be grabbing the reel here again, and I'm actually going into kind of very similar to my casting position. That will enable me to really what I call stir the pot. That's very important. So again, watch as I go into that transition. It'll take you a little time to get used to this, but it's very important. And you can go right or left. So here we go. Now watch this. I'm going to transition. There we go. And now look how far I can reach out. I can really manipulate this lure, okay? Now, again, I'm going to tell you, and this is essentially you're stepping on my boat for a guide trip here. When I see a fish coming, you know, I figure-8 every single cast, sometimes more than once. But when I see a fish coming, look at this. Look at how giant this figure-8 is now. I mean, this is not your average size figure-8. Folks don't realize that. When I get a muskie coming, I literally figure-8 probably about, I mean, I got an 18-foot boat. I probably figure-8 about 10 to 12 feet in total diameter. I mean, this is a humongous figure-8. That's where I'm using my long rod. This is the Elite by St. Croix, 9-foot medium heavy. But again, any rod will do. But the big thing is that you make big turns, especially when you've got a muskie coming in. Okay, a couple other things that are very important to go over here. Do you push the button when you're figure-8ing? I don't, okay? I've got my drag set so that it's pretty tight, and I want it to be tight, especially when it's like, you get what I'm saying is your thumb can slip. So when I go into the 8 here, and let's say I get a fish here or I get a fish here, I don't want to have to rely on my thumb to be the drag immediately. I want to actually really pop that fish. I don't want to have any slippage with you know, the spool slipping with my thumb. These big fish, and you know, you can get into some tricky scenarios where you go like this. You know, you're coming in and you're, you know, again, so don't do this. And you're going like this or something, and all of a sudden the fish hits and you're kind of not ready to set the hook and the line's going to come out. I don't push the button until I feel the need to do so, okay? I will go into manual mode, aka free spooling, when I feel that there's way too much pressure on the fish. So as I come in here, I go into my 8, and I'm going to simulate a strike here. So okay, here she comes. Got her. I'm going to probably do this. I'm going to pull the fish. I'm going to pull the fish. I'm going to keep my rod down. When I'm fighting a muskie in the figure-8, I'm keeping my rod down to try to eliminate the possibility of a muskie coming up and throwing the hook. So I'm keeping my rod down. I'm fighting the fish like this. Now, if the rod starts bending over the boat and this fish is like, it's big, then I go like this. Here, I'll simulate this. Going down, now I'm hit free spool. I got 2 thumbs on the reel. Now she's gonna be pulling line. I'm not letting the fish just swim away when I push the button, okay? I've got some serious tension on this thing, but I do want to allow a little bit of forgiveness, especially when a big fish isn't hooked well, or any muskie for that matter. When these muskies aren't hooked well, that's when I'm actually very much relying on my free spooling. I'm hitting that button, and then when I do, you know, let's say I'm fighting the fish, and then she's taking some line, click back up, you know, and then I reel up a little bit, push that button. Oh, she's taking a little more, reel up a little bit. So if you watch any of my videos when I'm free spooling muskies, you'll hear this. You'll hear me constantly doing this during the fight. It's button push. She's going to take a little line, click that, you know, crank that that reel back and engage the spool. Let her take a little line, engage the spool. Again, the idea is something's going to give sometimes on these big fish fights. It's not going to be the 80-pound test JBO Beast Braid. It's not going to be my knot. It's definitely not the steel leader. So what could give is you could bend a hook out. You could, more than likely than that, bust the flesh of the muskie. You know, this treble hook that's lodged in there, that's holding your lure to the fish. that can break loose under too much pressure. So that's one of the things you want to focus on when you're free spooling. Now, another tip that I'm going to throw at you, and this is another very, very important tip. Let's say you're fighting a muskie here. You're fighting a muskie, okay? And it hits with a foot of line out. You're like, Chaz, that's not a lot of line. I say, I know it's not a lot of line. But now you're fighting it, your buddy's got the net. Now, when you're bringing it in, you don't want to do this. Get it, John, get it. Look, you don't want to keep a foot of line out when your buddy's trying to net the muskie, unless you're going to do one of these, unless you're going to go like this and literally pull it, get your hands up here and pull the fish in, but you might not be thinking to do that. Neither would I. So what you want to do is, once you've fought that fish out enough and your buddy's saying, okay, I'll simulate the whole thing. Let's say, boom, she hit it right there. Oh, she set the hook, and I'm pulling it. Now, as I'm pulling it over to the net, I'm probably going to let a little bit of line out so I can swing this muskie into the net. Now that might be an exaggeration, but of the amount that I let out there. But you do not want to. It's one of my pet peeves actually. You don't want to net muskies if you can with a liter's worth of line out. Now if you literally hook one like this and your buddy just scoops it up, well, what are you going to do? That's how it works. But most of the time when you're fighting a fish, you might go across the bow over here, you might come on over here, and you've got to be able to give your buddy or girlfriend or wife or whoever you're fishing with a little bit of a little bit of give here on netting a muskie. Don't make it so hard on them, okay? And another thing that I'll talk about here, there's a lot to go over in figure eighting. It's essential. A lot of folks ask, well, how important is it really? Well, if I catch, for example, 100 muskies this season, about 50 of them, or even better, but surely 50 of them will probably come with this much line out. There'll be about a foot of line out, and that's what's getting the job done on a lot of these fish. Even on the most pristine waters, these muskies are finicky, and it takes a good figure-8 to tackle them and catch them. So I would say one of the last things that I try to tell folks when you're figure-8ing is beware of what I call the silent strike. And what a silent strike is, what does that mean, right? Well, a silent strike, a lot of folks have this misconception, at least that I take out, that they don't set the hook because they don't feel a muskie grab their lure. They're like, well, I didn't feel anything. I say, dude, the muskie had it the muskie had your lure in its mouth. He said, well, I didn't feel anything. Well, that's because when you're figure-8ing, the muskie simply overtakes the lure. It's swimming with the lure, and all it does is this. It's swimming with the lure, and all it does is this. You don't feel much. A lot of the figure-8 strikes are purely visual strikes. You actually see the muskie hit the lure. And so that's extremely important to think about here, is that your figure-8 strikes, although yes, you will see them, but if I'm figure-8ing deep here, and you can see how stained this water is, I mean, it's super dark right now, especially with the angle of the sun. You think I'm gonna see the strike? Well, I might not, but you're trying to feel it. But I guess I'd probably went against what I was just saying there. But what I'm trying to say is a lot of the strikes that you're getting in the figure-8 are visual, and they don't feel like much. It almost even feels like you've got slack in the line or something. So you need to be sure that you're watching. If the fish's mouth, if the muskie's mouth goes over the back hook, pull hard. Now, I've got a pontoon boat coming here, so hopefully I'll finish this whole thing up here for you pretty soon. One last thing that I'll talk about with the figure-8, and if you guys want, I'll do another tutorial on figure-8s if you like this. One last thing that I'll talk about here, guys, is how to set the hook. I personally set the hook in the direction that I'm moving. So if a muskie hits this thing, I'm gonna set it this way, or if it's the way that I'm pulling the lure is the way that I am setting the hook. My thought process behind this, you're gonna say, well, I've heard to set it backwards, and I've heard to, before you set the hook, tie your shoe and skip a couple times and then set the hook. Dude, people say some of the weirdest stuff, no offense, but when it comes to setting the hook on the figure-8, I've heard like the goofiest stuff. So I'm generally thinking this: if a muskie hits, again, you're pulling the lure toward the boat here, right? So let's say a muskie hits at the end of a long bomb cast. What are you gonna do? You're gonna pull the lure in the direction that the lure was originally traveling. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here on the figure-8. I'm gonna do the same exact process. You're not pulling the hook out of the muskie's mouth. You know, again, if she's coming here and she grabs it, bam, I'm pulling it like this. I'm actually setting the hook. I'm pulling the lure essentially into the muskie's mouth. I've heard this misconception many times that, oh, you're pulling the hooks out. You have to go backwards. Do you do that when a muskie strikes your lure way out at the end of a long cast? Do you somehow get behind the fish and pull the lure backward? No, I doubt it. I really don't think so, unless you're some kind of like supernatural muskie angler. So again, sorry to be a little hard on that one, but that's something that drives me nuts. A lot of times people, you know, comment like, oh, you got to do this, you got to do that. Hey, guess what? Sometimes these fish just don't get hooked very well, and when that happens, you don't catch all of them. The one thing you cannot control in this sport is the way that a muskie hits your lure. I can control the speed at which I'm working. I can control my timing, my boat positioning, all these things. I can't control how a muskie eats my lure. If a muskie's hooked well, you can get away with a lot. When a muskie's not hooked well, then it takes skill to catch the fish. And that's what I'm talking about with regard to free spooling a muskie and fighting it and keeping your rod down and knowing how much pressure to apply. Those are all important things. I would say the biggest, and then I'll say one last thing, as I'm really going on a litany here of figure-8 important things, and I'm kind of missing my window, but I want to get a vlog video out. I promise you guys a video a week, so I'm trying to stay on that. Here's one other thing, and this is probably, I'll leave you with this. If you want to really focus on one thing this summer and you're getting new, I wouldn't even say it's for folks that are getting new. This is something that I consistently see as a guide across the board. And this is why I think people lose a lot of their muskies in the figure-8, is because their first turn is not very good. You will lose the muskie, you will lose the muskie's interest a lot of times, unless it's like smoking hot and this thing's gonna eat anything. It might even jump in the boat. That's usually not the case, okay? What you need to make sure you do on every figure-8, this is not just if a muskie is following, is this. Watch this. I go down. Look at how big this first turn. Now, I'm not exaggerating this. The first turn is, to me, one of the most critical pieces in this entire figure-8 thing, because if you make a crap turn and the muskies, you finally got this muskie committed, and you do this, and I mean, I see this all the time, believe me. I'm on the water almost every day with clients and they're wonderful people, but they do that all the time. If you want to catch this fish, make it easy on them. Big muskies don't turn on a dime, neither do small ones, okay? They could if they want to, but believe me, when they're chasing a lure and they already know something's funny, and you can go this way too. And see how I transition into my casting position here? Out of the retrieve into the casting position. You need to make wide turns. This is one of the most important things I can tell you on this figure-8 tutorial, how to figure-8, whatever you want to call this. That's one of the most important things. So we covered a lot of material. Watch this a couple times. I'm gonna end here with one full speed top rater figure-8 scenario. Here we go, okay? Lure goes out, okay? And here we go. Now we'll just pretend there's a muskie following it. Okay, muskie's following right now. Here she comes, here she comes. I'm not changing the speed. I might pop it a little bit, burst a little bit. Okay, she's following, here she comes, here she comes. Now, rod tip goes into the water, well before the lure gets to the boat. And look at this, look at the speed. Big turn. I'm kneeling down, big turn. Now I'm going down deeper. I'm slowing down maybe on those turns on the outside, and then I'm speeding up in the middle, and then I'm going down. Ooh, she almost got it, she nicked it, she nicked it. Now I'm going around that turn, come on, come on. Oh, got her. That's it. That's the way, in my humble opinion, that it should look. It's got to be big. You've got to keep your speed. You've got to be in control. Of course, you know, you change your speed in relationship to how active you think the fish is. If I've got muskies that are really just lagging along and barely moving, yeah, then I figure-8 slower. But generally speaking, if I got a muskie coming in and she's moving, I keep that speed or maybe even increase it a little bit. So guys, there you have it. Those are my top secrets on figure-8ing. It's one of the most critical, you know, techniques that you need. It's not that you should master, you need to master it in order to become a better musky angler, okay? Again, if you want to see more of these tutorials, I hope you do, because I'm going to try to do more of these during the peak season here. I'm not at my whiteboard as much as I'd like to be, so we'll get the whiteboard back out probably, unless it's a rainy day. We'll probably get that back out in the fall once I start teaching school again. So for right now, we're going to do these on the water tutorials. I hope you enjoyed this, and as always, thanks for watching.